Okay, Eric, I see that you want to talk about something that I personally don't understand, which is limits and prerequisites in VCS. Can you just make this make a little more sense to someone like me or anyone else?
I will certainly try. And
good, I hope
don't feel
so.
too bad, because I do think that limits and prerequisites is probably one of those features in VCS that is probably the least understood and probably one of the more useful features available to you. It's easy to think of, if you think of limits and prerequisites as limits being resources that a server has and prerequisites being resources that a service group requires. Pretty simple. The way they actually work is I set the value of limits to some name that makes sense to me. And the use case I'm trying to illustrate here is where I'm trying to limit the number of database instances that any one of my servers in the cluster can host. So in order to do that, I say, all right, I want to limit the number of instances of databases to 2 per server. So I say limits db equals 2 for each one of the servers. So sys1 and sys2 both have a limits attribute saying db equals 2. My first 3 service groups, SG1 through SG3, have a prerequisites attribute set to db equals 1. So they each represent 1 instance of a database resource. When any one of these service groups goes online on one of these nodes, it's going to subtract its prerequisites value from the corresponding limits value for that server. So because sys1 is now hosting SG1 and SG2, both of which have db equals 1 for their prerequisites, effectively sys1 now has limits equals 0 for databases. So if SG3 were to attempt to go online there, it would fail because there are no remaining database resources on that server. SG4 has no prerequisite set, so if something were to go wrong here, it could fail over with no problem. So if we were to lose, for example, system sys2, in this case, we would effectively lose SG3, service group 3, because it can't run anywhere. The actual error that would be logged in the VCS engine log is something like no servers or no systems exist that meet the service group's prerequisites. Service group 4 would fail over just fine because it has no prerequisites. It just doesn't care. This is a feature that would ordinarily be implemented in larger clusters. It's just a whole lot easier to illustrate using a 2-node cluster example.
Well, one other question that I have is, where is this actually set? Is this set in some file somewhere in the VCS configuration?
Yes. So just like every other attribute in the cluster, it is going to be saved in the main.cf file.
Okay.
And you can set it through the HA resource, the HA group command for setting the service group attributes, or the HA sys commands for setting the system limits attribute. Okay. It's also worth noting that this is a multi-dimensional attribute, so I can set multiple parameters. So for example, I might say limits CPU equals 8 and mem equals 16, and then set minimum requirements for my service groups of a matching name saying the minimum number of CPUs and minimum number of amount of memory that's required.
Okay, fantastic. Well, this makes a little more sense, and I appreciate you saying that it would probably be used more on a larger number of servers, let's say a cluster that had more than 2 nodes in it.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. But I'm still wondering, where's service group 3 hiding in this when this happens?
It goes, all right, so that's an interesting
You're
question.
going to tell us later?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you. What would happen in this instance is a trigger would be, an event trigger would be invoked called no failover. And this is a situation that occurs when a service group is on a failed host or has some other sort of fault, and the remaining nodes in the cluster cannot support that service group. So that invokes a no failover event, and we'll cover event triggers in another one of these videos.
Fantastic. So thanks a lot for explaining this, and hopefully it makes more sense to everybody else. It does to me now.
Right.